Okay, I think I'm going to begin because people can just come in as we are talking. Let me give you a little bit of background to this reading. First of all, welcome. Thank you for being here. So this is called She Rebounds, Persists, Rebounding from Rejection. And it began with the idea that I was sitting around thinking, gee, I have a book. Jen has a book. Leslie has a book. What can we do with that? So I talked to the two of them, and we figured out that we had other things in common. Um, Another thing we have in common is we're all editors as well as writers. So we can speak to both sides of the rejection situation. We're also all women, and it's March. So that seemed to be a really, fortuitous coincidence. And I think it's important as women to think about rejection in a particular way, because I'm sure you know that we tend to get rejected more than men do. According to the last Vita count, for example, there are journals that are publishing women as low as 33% of their writers. So it's important to think about that on Women's International Day, and maybe, you know, persist until you do get published more, and ask for more women writers to be published in the publications that you enjoy. So that was pretty much the background to the idea. And what we're going to do tonight, I think, is we're just going to read you some poems and tell you the history of their publication and how we persisted until they got published. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our first reader, who is Jen Karetnik. Hi, Jen. She is the author of 5 full-length poetry collections, including Hunger Until It's Pain, which is forthcoming spring 2023, The Burning Where Breath Used to Be, her current book, and The Treasures That Prevail, the finalist for the 2017 Poetry Society of Virginia Book Prize. She is also the author of 5 poetry chapbooks, including The Crossing Over, winner of the 2018 Split Rock Review Chapbook Competition. Her poems have been awarded the Hart Crane Memorial Prize, the Romeo LeMay Poetry Prize, the Anna Davidson Rosenberg Prize, and 2 Dorothy Sargent Rosenberg Prizes, among others. Her work appears recently or is forthcoming in Barrow Street, the Comstock Review, December, Michigan Quarterly Review, Terrain, Under a Warm Green Linden, Valparaiso Poetry Review, and elsewhere. Co-founder and managing editor of Swim Every Day, that's SWWIM, Jen is currently a Deering Estate artist in residence. You can find her on Twitter at Karetnik and Instagram at Jen Karetnik, or you can visit jkaretnik.com, or you can listen to her right now tell you all about herself. Take it away, Jen.
Thank you, Celia. What Celia didn't mention is that we did our MFA together, sort of together, at University of Miami. It was my second MFA. I did it in fiction. You did poetry? Poetry.
I did fiction, believe it or not.
So it was so long ago, I can't remember, which I probably shouldn't mention, because we're women, we're ageless women. We persist in our beauty. So when I did my first MFA in poetry out at University of California, it was so long ago that nobody told us things like how to submit our work, where to submit our work. In fact, they told us we would never be poets or writers and that we shouldn't bother submitting our work. So we would just have to invent our own systems and figure it out ourselves. So I actually did invent my own system, and I've kept it up to this day. I have these little boxes, and I brought one of them out to show you, that I keep with index cards. And I've lost some of them over the years, but for every book, once the book is published, I take all of the poems that are in the book and I put the index cards that represent every poem in the box. And that way I know that the poem is no longer to be sent out And I also have a record of all the places that it was sent, how many times it was sent out, and where it was sent, how many times it was declined. And sometimes the poem never makes it into a journal before it makes it into the book. So it was very interesting to me to do this because I've never done this before. But for this book, I added up all of the times every single poem was sent out. And I found out that these poems were sent out 1,760 times. So she really does persist. There are 60 poems in the book. So that comes out to an average of 29 times per poem, which is kind of astonishing because you see on Twitter a lot of times people are like, oh my God, my poem just got picked up and I sent it out 9 times. I can't believe it. That's so amazing to me. And I'm like, well, yeah. So I have poems that were sent out 59 times, 53 times, 86 times, 48 times. But I also have poems that were sent out 1 time. And sometimes there's no rhyme or reason for that. And sometimes you just get lucky. And sometimes you wind up targeting the right publication and the right editor. So I'm going to read a couple of poems that are right on average from the book that were sent out 20 times. I'm going to read one poem that was sent out 1 time. And I'm going to read one poem that was sent out 48 times and was picked up after the book was already published. So the first poem, and I should say a little something about the book. The book is called The Burning Where Breath Used to Be. It's a lot about faith, questioning of faith, family, feminism, a lot of social justice. I started to write it a couple of years before the current, not the current administration, the previous administration, and throughout the previous administration. So there's a lot of anger in the book too. And then there's some chronic illness as well. So this poem, Vitreous, which is a sonnet, was sent out 20 times. It wound up in the Journal of American Medicine, Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA, which my husband was really mad about because he's never been published in JAMA, and I have. Vitreous. From 8 until 3, she teaches Shakespeare half lit, her eye melting wax from the candle, the flame burning the whole of her pupil. Her vision is Morse code, spy code, a bar code, a bush of mosquitoes with Zika, sluggish, misted from too far with Naled. A soliloquy of flaws, like Hamlet, the membrane chooses to be or not to be, detaches an arrow at a time, on pace, before the shafts lasered back into its quiver. Like crackers broken in packets, but still constrained by shape, leaded stained glass. Her eye is the poet. No one else sees the world around her fall into pieces. The second poem is also right on target, 21 times. This one wound up in Crab Orchard Review, and it is a golden shovel, and it uses William Carlos Williams' very famous poem, So Much Depends Upon a Red Wheelbarrow. So you'll hear those lines, those words at the end of the lines. And this one is about my childhood and my brother, who appears a lot in this book. Plexiglass Suburbia. In the summertime, when the New Jersey humidity is so thick, it can be kneaded like dough. And there isn't much to do besides taunt and be taunted. Everything depends on making the Daredevil Club. Admittance is granted upon a feat of such physical audacity that even a Spartan, even a boy like my brother, cannot deny the legacy of red, stippled scars it will surely leave behind. The wheelbarrow of flesh and courage that can be carted away in equal glazed measures from the site. My turn. At the top of North Ashby, with a neon orange skateboard no one knows how to ride. In rain that has been falling for days, collecting in the potholes, the water rubicund with clay from half-built housing developments beside our cul-de-sac. In my imagination, I crouch and glide, but in the end, I sit, knees to chest, and cast off, an unguided blur of white. It's no use. I arrive clean and whole to be cast down with chickens. And I know you can't hear it because I already asked, but the peacocks are in, I guess that they're not in heat, but they're in mating season. And I just finished reading that poem in the peacock call. It's like perfect timing. I live in a bird sanctuary, so the peacocks roam around here. This next poem, I sent out once. I wrote it in response to a very triggering statement in the news. I sent it to Rattle, which I understand is a problematic journal. It didn't understand that then, but it was picked up. So I only sent it out once. Miracle of miracles. This is called Nobody Dies Because They Don't Have Access to Healthcare. Nobody knows about how the fingers of fog have blown the fuses of her synapses until the email has been sent and returned, the form submitted incorrectly, the name misspelled but published anyway. Even her conversation has retractions most days. Then nobody can't find the words she wants and substitutes the silence of a search party whose communication is the weak stuttering of drugstore flashlights. But what is there anyway to say? A poorly balanced budget, cellular call and response, toxic to herself. Nobody only pre-exists before what is not likely to be a grand exit, but the kind few notice, like the melting of those sneaky slivers of ice in a dry martini. Nobody's digestive organs have joined a union to limit the hours they want to work. Nobody's muscles and joints resist like dogs who think their humans are on the other side of the door, who have not really left and are up to playing some sort of cruel trick. But it's a matter of willpower, healthy eating, giving up the Diet Coke, more water, says everybody nobody meets, who all recommend hot yoga as correct as House Republicans. Tomorrow, it's time to take that advice instead of pills. Invest in ClassPass rather than Blue Cross Blue Shield, and believe that in decades, nobody will still be posing in the light steam awash with joy. Look at her now, already, how nobody sweats and laughs. And this last poem, which is probably not the strongest poem in the book, but was rejected 48 times and picked up after the book was published and then nominated for a Pushcart Prize. So you never know. Will it win one? I highly doubt it. But it's called, again, after a news event. Marine pilots investigated for drawing penis and testicles with plane, which I think is an excellent way to end this for International Women's Day because, well, I guess we'll see. And then I will introduce our next reader. Marine pilots investigated for drawing penis and testicles with plane over the Salton Sea with the aircraft shooting out of the tip of the phallus. We should be offended by this obscene blueprint. Protest it, mapped in the unbolted embrace of the sky, digitally drawn where the subsonic goes supersonic, where the air molecules make their bunched, bucking complaints. We recognize that sound, what it could mean: muffler, fireworks, gunshot, whip. We see how these men have amused themselves, the way our sons did before we taught them better. This is not breaking news. This is only breaking women, again, who have seen dicks pop up everywhere since birth, on whiteboards in school, smudged by cleats in the early morning dew on soccer fields, sprung from zippers at parties by future judges. Face it with such common intrusion that suspends in our space like aerosol. We can only do as the firmament does, moment by moment, retain the right to gust and grow electric and strike. How many times is that again? 1,760. So be interesting, right? To count them all up. So now I'm going to introduce our next reader. Leslie Wheeler's new books are The State She's In, her 5th poetry collection, and Unbecoming, her 1st novel, both available everywhere books are sold. She is poetry editor of Shenandoah and lives in Lexington, Virginia. You can find her online at Leslie M. Wheeler, and she blogs about poetry at lesliewheeler.org. So, Leslie?
All right. Thank you so much, Jen. That was really great. Can everybody hear me okay? Doing all right? Okay. A couple of things I want to say before I read you a couple of, or 3 poems from the book and tell you their complicated histories. I wanted to say first that I became poetry editor of Shenandoah in 2018. Somebody had just put in the chat that it's like winning the lottery, sometimes getting an acceptance. And that's not untrue. That there are, when I first was editing Shenandoah in 2018, the journal had come to have a slightly smaller profile, and it has grown since then. So the submissions were at a reasonable rate at first, and they've become insane. I opened for 2 weeks in February and got almost 800 batches of poems. And I'm still struggling with that pile, which has way more really good poems than we have spaces for. I have 19 spaces. So that tells you something about the odds. And it has taught me as a writer to take it less personally than when I get rejected. Not that I always manage that. Sometimes I take it very personally, but more often I'm able to be sort of philosophical about how the editor was tired when they read my poems, or they already had 5 villanelles, or, that there are endless factors that can contribute to a person being rejected. I would say that I have not done the impressive amount of counting that Jen did, but I certainly relate to those experiences and can count a lot of rejections that I've also experienced. And now I see myself on the other side of it, and I see that if an editor encourages you to resubmit, my God, do it fast. When I encourage people to resubmit, it's typically the white men who instantly do and everybody else who hangs fire for 2 years. So when people take time out to send you that kind of encouraging rejection, you should absolutely jump on it as soon as you have something good. And also just say, like, editors are wrong sometimes, they miss things sometimes, and I think persistence is the thing that carries people through and into bigger careers more than anything else. I think it matters. And I'm talking about 2 kinds of persistence: the persistence in sending out and trying to find audiences, but also persistence in craft. Like, just recognizing that sometimes the rejection is telling you something valuable, that the poem wasn't ready yet, and you have to keep trying and you have to keep making it better. And those 2 kinds of persistence, I firmly believe they matter more than luck. They matter more than connections. I would even say maybe not exactly that they matter more than talent, but persistence makes talent. The person who starts off with some kind of advantages and then doesn't hone them and doesn't keep trying to do better is not going to do as well in the end as somebody who's been just dogged about trying to keep learning and writing. So I will say that in this particular book, so this is my 5th poetry collection. and we can talk. Feel free to put questions in the chat. We can talk in the end about book acceptances and rejections too, which is a whole other adventure. I'd be horrified, I'm sure, to add up how many dollars I've spent in contest fees over the years. But I'd measured in preparation for this how many times I submitted poems in 2020. It was actually a kind of low submission year for me because I was also working some fiction and some nonfiction. But I subbed 41 batches of poems in 2020. 23 batches were rejected entirely. 9 poems were, or rather, 9 magazines accepted 1 or 2 poems from that batch, and then another 9 haven't reported yet because most journals take 1,000,000 years, right? So my odds are way better now than they were when I started. When one poem would typically take about 20 submissions to get there. I think I know the market a little bit better. I hope my poems are better. But I think it's also true that you get a lucky break or two and your bio gets better and you start making it past the screeners to the editors. I think that can matter too. So this is a book in which I was doing a lot of research into the history of Virginia and trying to come to terms with 20 years belatedly with the fact that I live here, 26 years belatedly, and in particular the racist histories of the place and how I was in denial that I was complicit with them. So as it sounds, that's really hard stuff to write. And I think I failed again and again and again as I tried to write this material. And I think a lot of the rejections I received on poems were deserved, that the poems were taking risks, which is really important, and trying to tackle difficult material, but doing it inadequately. This poem is called Turning 50 in the Confederacy. And I submitted it about a dozen times before the editor at Ecotone asked me to revise and resubmit, which happens all the time with journal articles, but I think doesn't happen with poems that often. And I was so grateful to her for giving me another chance to try to get it right. And she did take it the second time around, which happy ending. One of the things that's complicated about this poem is it quotes a couple of lines from the song Dixie, right? Hard to get right. There are so many reasons I'm not going to sing them as I read this poem out loud. To live and die in Dixie was never the plan. Old times here seemed best forgotten, so down I plowed them. Heritage, clay, atrocity, clay, not secession, dispossession. Long Island's where I was born, 3 o'clock on a starry morning, bleeding an American hymn. There is no here. Away, away. At 26, pitched what seemed like camp in a Virginia valley. First draft, provisional, now set in sediment. There's shame beneath my fingernails, isotopic signature of stolen soil in my bones. I'm made of Dixie. Forgetting's the trick of Daniel Emmett's air, lifted from Ohio neighbors, the Snowdens, black musicians. Dixie may have been a Harlem farmer who sold slaves south, and one of them, name unsung, composed that verse of yearning to return. Story goes, the Lost Cause anthem began as a wish to slip north, passed from author to fiddler to the white guy who filed copyright. Look away. Years wash past in silty muck. Can't carry this tune, can't give it back. Its burden stuck. Become me. The next poem I'm going to read is a sonnet that I sent it out a little less because I recognized that some of the risks associated with them with this particular piece meant that I really probably needed a feminist editor. So this one, it's called Inappropriate. It's from a sequence of sonnets I wrote during the 2016 election. And it turns out to be quite difficult to sell sonnets about Hillary Clinton. they're tricky. And I understand that I was probably pissing off a lot of editors who were not like right wing, but were saw rightly Hillary Clinton as the less progressive candidate, and did not like my politics from a different direction. So, and I do think that happened. It's a more complicated Hillary Clinton poem than usual because it does contain the word vagina, which would prevent a lot of other editors from publishing it. I think, I wonder to what extent that made it difficult to sell the whole book, that there was this little sequence in the middle. I do think that one of the reasons I wrote these poems is that she was getting a deeply discriminatory treatment in the media, as I was experiencing discrimination in my workplace, and my friends were as well. And so it was a moment when politics at the larger scene were sort of resonating catastrophically with the politics in my life. And that material can be hard to shop around too. So it's called Inappropriate. Worse than blood coming out of her wherever is when it did, but it's done. And now, rather than bake ginger snaps, she opens her lips, teeth in there. No, you can't sit on her lap. A pantsuit has campaigning to do. A pantsuit spots an opening in the White House, calling the shots from that lock she's got, the flesh-gate, pink-lined box with an heirloom pearl on top. Some men mind the very idea, someone in the oval they neither want to be nor use. No girl, no give, not pretty or cane sugar sweetened, not dead of shame, not yet. Not making way, just her bad, inhospitable, secret vagina delivering plans. Can't see what she's got up there's what they can't stand. That one was a lot of fun to write, but yeah. There were a lot of places I wouldn't have sent it. The last one was the one that was rejected most. I thought it was going to be the title poem of the collection. The title of the poem is L, like just the letter L, for the number 50 and for lots of other symbolic reasons. I did a strange compositional thing where it's a poem that's 50 lines long in 50 character lines. I was inspired to do that by all the grant proposals that measure by character, all the grants that also reject me. So it turns out that you can't actually see that constraint unless the poem is in a monospace font, like Courier, because most fonts, the kerning, make the lines look ragged. So I sent it off again and again in monospace fonts, and it got rejected 17 times and I then finally I said, forget it. And I put it in, I don't know, Garamond or Times New Roman, and sent it off to the Gettysburg Review, and they took it like that. And so it's like, okay, was that nobody wanted to have my ugly font in their magazine, or was that, I don't know. But so now it's in the book with that particular formal constraint completely invisible. I'm going to read just the beginning of it because I think I might have run over time a bit. So just to give you a sense of what it's like. 1967 was on fire. Apollo 1 waiting to launch, Jim Morrison on Ed Sullivan stoking it higher, Mekong Delta, Newark riot hurling out sparks, summer of Osaka to me, sock. Pulsar first glimpsed, black hole first named, far south Deception Islands volcano in flames. So I had a lot of fun riffing on the year 1967 and on all the things that L can mean. So here I'm going to introduce Celia and hand it over to her and just say that I am so grateful to Celia, who is the evil mastermind of this event and who is a wonderful poet and editor and literary citizen. Please put your hands together for Celia. Oh, wait, I didn't introduce you. Sorry, Celia. You can clap again in a minute. All right, so Celia Lisset Alvarez received her MFA from the University of Miami in 1996. In 2006, she published Shape Shifting, winner of the 2005 Spire Press Poetry Award, and The Stones. Multiverses, her third collection, is a speculative memoir in verse and is now in pre-publication sales to be officially released May 7th by Finishing Line Press. You can buy it at finishinglinepress.com or at her website, celialissetalvarez.com. She is currently the editor of Prospectus, a literary offering, which is the sponsor of this event. Celia.
Thank you, Leslie, for that introduction. I'm a little frazzled because I have to upgrade to the professional version or they're going to cut us off in 1 minute. So can we start the Q&A now, and then I'll jump in and read my poems after a few minutes?
Yes, of course.
Okay, go ahead and start the Q&A.
Somebody has asked, Jen, why is Rattle a problematic journal? There have been so many POBIZ scandals over the past few years that I've lost track of that one.
Yeah, there have. Just a couple. Well, one of the most recent scandals is that Poetry Magazine, big poetry magazine that we all know, sometimes love, published a carceral issue, which is an issue about poets who have been imprisoned. Some have been released, some have served their time, but they wound up publishing a pedophile. And pedophiles are one of those criminals that don't really repent, can't really be